Have you ever felt the chilling presence of someone who wasn't there? I have. My name is Ethan, and I was the lone survivor of the tragic crash of Flight 401. This is my story of how I came face to face with the restless spirits of the dead and the dark secrets that haunted them and me. The night of the crash is seared into my memory. It's a constant loop of horror that plays behind my eyelids every time I close them. I remember the plane shuddering violently in mid-air, the deafening roar of the engines failing, and the overwhelming panic that filled the cabin like a thick, suffocating fog. Faces of the passengers, frozen in fear, flashed through my mind like a grotesque slideshow. As the plane plummeted toward the earth, there was a moment of eerie silence, a calm before the inevitable chaos. And then, everything went black. When I awoke in the wreckage, the world was a cacophony of fire, smoke, and twisted metal. Bodies lay strewn about like rag dolls, their lifeless eyes staring into the void. I was alive, but barely. I stumbled through the debris, my ears ringing and my mind screaming, "Why me?" Out of the corner of my eye, a flash of movement made my heart leap into my throat. I whipped around, but nothing was there. Just the eerie, shifting shadows cast by the flickering flames. But I could feel it, eyes watching me from the darkness. In the weeks that followed, the nightmares began. Every night I found myself back in that burning fuselage, surrounded by the anguished cries of those who didn't survive. Yet, it wasn't just in my dreams, it started with small things. A whisper in an empty room, the fleeting shadow of a figure standing behind me in the mirror. Each time I turned to look, I was met with an empty room and my own haunted reflection. One night, as I stood at the bathroom sink splashing water on my face to wake myself from this living nightmare, the mirror fogged up. I watched in horror as words appeared, etched into the condensation by an unseen hand. "Help us." My heart raced, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. The messages became more frequent, the spirits more desperate. They needed something from me, something I wasn't ready to give. I began researching the crash obsessively, trying to understand why these spirits were drawn to me. That's when I stumbled upon a chilling discovery. The airline had salvaged parts from the downed Flight 401 and used them to repair other planes. The very thought sent shivers down my spine. It was as if those souls were trapped in a limbo of steel and sky, tethered to this world by the very parts that had failed them. The next morning I woke up with scratches on my arm, as if someone, or something, was trying to claw its way through. The spirits were getting angrier, their presence more sinister. I knew I had to do something before it was too late, before the malevolent energy that had surrounded me became something I couldn't escape. I needed to understand what they wanted, what they needed from me. And that's how I found myself on a plane again, trembling in my seat as the aircraft taxied down the runway. I had to confront the truth, whatever it was, and help these tormented souls find peace. But deep down, I knew there was more to this than I had uncovered. Something darker, something terrifying lurked in the shadows of this mystery, and I feared what I might find when I dug deeper into the haunted legacy of Flight 401. As the plane ascended into the sky, I clutched the armrest, my knuckles white with tension. I couldn't shake the feeling that this flight would end in disaster, just like Flight 401. Every rattle and bump sent my heart racing. Yet, I was determined to face whatever awaited me. The spirits of Flight 401 were counting on me. I spent the entire flight poring over the notes and articles I had gathered. The deeper I dug, the more unsettling the story became. The airline had indeed salvaged parts from the wreckage, using them to repair other planes. Reports of hauntings on these aircrafts were mounting. Passengers and crew members claimed to see ghostly apparitions of the flight attendants and pilots, only for them to vanish into thin air. As the flight attendant walked down the aisle, I glanced out the window. Suddenly, the reflection in the glass revealed a passenger sitting beside me, staring at me with vacant, accusing eyes. I jolted in my seat and turned quickly, but the seat was empty. My heart thudded as cold sweat trickled down my spine. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to find them. Once the plane landed, I made my way to a small town near the crash site where survivors and family members of the victims gathered every year for a memorial service. At the service, I met Linda, a former flight attendant who had narrowly missed the doomed flight due to a last-minute schedule change. Her eyes were weary, her voice a whisper of the horrors she'd learned about the crash. "They're trapped," Linda confided, her voice trembling. Their souls are tied to the parts. They're not just haunting the planes, they're stuck in a cycle of suffering, reliving their last moments over and over again. Why me? I asked, desperate for clarity. Why do they keep reaching out to me? You survived, she replied, her gaze piercing. You were chosen to help them. They need closure, Ethan. They need you to find a way to free them. That night, as I lay in the small hotel room, the temperature dropped drastically. My breath fogged the air, and a chilling presence filled the room. The walls seemed to close in, shadows twisting and contorting into ghastly shapes. A chorus of whispers filled my ears, growing louder and more insistent. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding. In the corner of the room, a figure stood watching me. It was one of the flight attendants, her eyes hollow and pleading. I had to act. I needed to understand the connection between the haunted parts and the spirit's suffering. The thought of stepping onto one of those cursed planes made my blood run cold, but it was the only way to find the truth. I managed to contact a mechanic who had worked on the salvage project. He agreed to meet me at an abandoned hangar where the remnants of Flight 401 were stored. The hangar stood like a mausoleum, filled with the ghosts of the past. Walking through the rusted doors, I was overwhelmed by an inexplicable heaviness. The air was thick with the scent of oil and decay, as if the hangar itself mourned the tragedy that had unfolded. The mechanic, Tom, was a grizzled man with eyes that spoke of the things he had seen. He led me through the maze of twisted metal and shattered dreams. These parts, he muttered, his voice barely audible over the creaking structure. They were never meant to fly again. As Tom opened a rusty cargo container, I saw the cockpit of Flight 401, eerily intact despite the crash. Suddenly, a cacophony of anguished cries echoed through the hangar, and the lights flickered violently. The air became electric with energy, and I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there, just the shadows, watching, waiting. In that moment, it became clear to me. The spirits wanted the world to know the truth about what happened. They wanted justice, recognition of their pain and loss, and they needed me to be their voice. Tom and I worked tirelessly through the night, documenting the ghostly occurrences and gathering evidence of the haunting. As dawn broke, the hangar was filled with a sense of uneasy calm. The spirits seemed to have withdrawn, as if satisfied that their message was finally being heard. But I knew this was only the beginning. The deeper I delved into this mystery, the darker and more dangerous it became. There were secrets hidden in the shadows of Flight 401, secrets that some would kill to keep buried. As the sun rose over the abandoned hangar, I felt the weight of the spirit's anguish pressing heavily on my shoulders. The pieces of this sinister puzzle were slowly coming together, but I needed to act quickly. The restless souls of Flight 401 wouldn't wait forever, and I feared what might happen if I failed them. I spent the next few days analyzing the evidence Tom and I had collected. Disturbing patterns emerged, pointing to a sinister cover-up. The airline's decision to salvage parts from the wreckage wasn't just an act of negligence. It was a calculated decision to save money, disregarding the potential consequences. My investigation was becoming dangerous. Strange occurrences began to escalate. I received anonymous threats warning me to stop digging, and it was clear that someone, or something, wanted to keep the secrets of Flight 401 buried. One night, as I was sifting through documents in my dimly lit apartment, a gust of wind slammed the windows shut, plunging the room into darkness. The shadows seemed to shift and writhe, forming the silhouettes of passengers and crew from the ill-fated flight. Their eyes were wide with terror, their mouths moving silently in desperate pleas. A cold, disembodied voice filled the room. "Find the truth, Ethan! Set us free!" Panicked, I fumbled for the light switch. As the room was bathed in light once more, the shadows vanished, leaving behind only a profound sense of urgency. With renewed determination, I knew I had to confront the airline directly. Armed with my evidence, I arranged a meeting with Mark Reynolds, a high-ranking executive who was rumored to have orchestrated the salvage operation. My heart raced as I approached the imposing glass building that housed the airline's headquarters. Mark Reynolds was a man who exuded power and intimidation, his cold eyes scrutinizing me as I laid out the evidence before him. "This is absurd," he scoffed, dismissing the reports as wild conspiracy theories. But I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes, a crack in his facade that told me he was hiding something. "You're playing with forces you don't understand," he warned, his voice laced with veiled threats. "Drop this investigation, Ethan, for your own safety." But I couldn't back down. The spirits of Flight 401 deserved justice, and I was their only hope. With nothing left to lose, I decided to go public with my findings. The world needed to know the truth about the airline's unethical practices and the haunted legacy of Flight 401. The night before I was set to release the information, I was awakened by a loud crash in the living room. My heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made my way toward the noise. The room was a mess, furniture overturned and documents scattered everywhere. In the center of the chaos stood a spectral figure, a pilot from Flight 401. His eyes were filled with sorrow as he reached out to me, whispering, "You're our last hope." In that moment, I understood. The spirits weren't just trapped, they were being manipulated by something darker. A malevolent force that fed on their despair, using them to wreak havoc on the living. I needed to confront this evil head-on, to free the souls once and for all. With Tom's help, I gained access to the hangar one final time. As night fell, we gathered around the remains of Flight 401, armed with our resolve and a plan to put the spirits to rest. The atmosphere was charged with tension, the air thick with an unnatural chill, shadows flickered in the corners of my vision, the whispers of the lost souls growing louder and more frantic. "Show yourself!" I shouted into the darkness, demanding the entity reveal itself. The temperature plummeted, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the hangar. Suddenly the shadows coalesced into a monstrous form, a twisted amalgamation of the passengers' fears and regrets, a malevolent spirit born from their suffering. Its eyes glowed with a sinister light, its voice a cacophony of despair. Tom and I stood our ground, determined to end this nightmare. "You've fed on their pain for too long," I declared, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "It ends tonight." Together we invoked the spirits of Flight 401, urging them to let go of their earthly ties and find peace. The air crackled with energy as the spirits gathered around us, their presence a comforting warmth against the cold malevolence. As the entity writhed and howled, its form began to fracture, the spirit's collective will overpowering its dark influence. But then, in a shocking twist, the entity turned its gaze on me. It wasn't just a random malevolence, it had been part of the crash, a corrupt energy that had lingered within me since I survived. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been unknowingly harboring the very force that tormented the spirits. My survival wasn't just luck, it was a cruel twist of fate. I was the tether keeping the spirits bound. In a final act of courage, I offered myself as a conduit for the spirits' release. As they flowed through me, their pain and suffering were overwhelming, but I embraced it, knowing it was the only way to set them free. The entity shattered, its dark energy dissipating into the ether. The spirits, their faces now serene, whispered words of gratitude as they ascended, finally free from their earthly torment. As the dawn broke over the hangar, I felt a profound sense of peace. The nightmare of Flight 401 had finally come to an end, and the spirits were at rest. Though the truth would be a heavy burden to bear, I knew it was my duty to share their story, to ensure such a tragedy would never happen again. In the end, the ghosts of Flight 401 had found their closure, and I had found my redemption. The haunting had ended, but the echoes of Flight 401 would remain with me forever.